Today, our topic is on the importance of culture. And this is a topic we have not talked about in some time at this HR nonprofit peer group. If you were attending our meetings back in 2017 and 2018, you very likely were attending something on this topic. At that time, our attendees continuously requested more about culture. They wanted to learn more. They wanted to go deeper. And at that time, we were asking questions, what is culture and how do I hire and how can I improve employee engagement? And we really did see organizations that made some tremendous improvement internally. Now, today, there's a whole new set of challenges. In 2020, many nonprofits needed to lay off staff. We're seeing organizations that are experiencing high turnover rate. And there's a lot of organizations that are trying to navigate the waters of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which by no means is any easy task. So you might be here today and morale is low at your organization. You might be dealing with some workplace tensions. And we thought this is really a perfect time to hear the message of the importance of culture. I know for me, after hearing a presentation like this, I always leave feeling more hopeful and empowered. So with us today, we have Deirdre Bird. She is from Von Lehman CPA and advisory firms. And Von Lehman is more than a financial and accounting firm. Actually, they have been offering HR consulting services for some years now. They have a plethora of services that they provided. I was only able to get a portion of them on my slide. I'd encourage you to jump over to their website to see their comprehensive list of services. And Deidre is joining us from Cincinnati. She is a wealth of information. She has 20 years of HR management and consulting. So Deirdre, welcome. We are glad to have you back.
Oh, Julie, thank you so much. It's great to partner with charitable advisors again too, and as you said too, on a topic that is really at the moment for all of us top of mind. And I will echo what Julie said about the salary report. That is such critical information. So as you have gone into your salary report and looked at salaries, we're going to talk about that next piece then too, which is, if you have then competitive salary and benefits for employees, let's talk about then some other ways too that you can attract talent, drive engagement and employee well-being, and impact performance in the organization. So Julie, if you'll advance on, I'll touch on our agenda for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about what culture is, how we're defining culture in this instance, and a little bit then too about how employees experience culture in the organization and really external stakeholders as well, and touch on some best practices. So Julie, if you'll advance on too. Thank you. So as you know, we have a challenging labor market right now. If you haven't heard this term before, the term we're hearing is the Great Resignation. So, we're seeing a lot of job movement in the market. Certainly the past 18 months, so many employees are reevaluating their jobs, reevaluating their careers. And we're finding that there's still a lot of uncertainty in the market right now too. For example, considering vaccination mandates. And so it just means that all of that is adding into kind of a little bit of turmoil. And as we look at the competition for talent, organizations like Costco and Amazon, CVS, and Walgreens have all just raised their minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. And then Walmart and Target and Amazon recently offered to employees that they're going to provide free tuition and textbooks. And those are fantastic perks, but certainly in the nonprofit world, we can't necessarily, if we're paying a fair salary, can't necessarily compete with some of those same things. But where we can make a difference is with organization culture, and a strong culture really is a common denominator among successful organizations. So we're going to touch on some different ways that you can have in your organization this competitive advantage as you're dealing with this current state in which there is still a lot of ambiguity in our organizations. So let's move on to talking about what culture is, how we're defining it right now in terms of today's presentation. And it really is about the beliefs and values in the organization, and then how the behaviors and perceptions are then impacted by those beliefs and values. So it's really sort of what the organization does. Let's look at then in the next slide, how others experience your culture. And if you think about an organization, for example, that has a really strong culture and that many of us are familiar with, you think about Disney, for example, and you can start to see, some of how others experience your organization's culture is both internally and externally. Some of it's about how employees interact with your clients, especially in those interactions that aren't always the easiest. Maybe there's a complaint, or maybe there's that moment of, working with a client who, is coming to your organization because they need help. And so their emotional state is high. What's that greeting like as somebody interacts with your organization? And then even internally, in terms of stakeholders, our employees who are more experienced mentoring the newer employees. Perhaps some of the behavior that we're seeing too is how managers are really providing that understanding of the value that employees are providing to your constituents by sharing the positive feedback there. So there are a number of different ways in which we can see that behavior then starts to really help us understand, get our arms around culture. And then the question is, can you do anything about building a better culture? Or is it sort of you get what you get, and you just have to take what comes your way? And the answer is that organizations really can be intentional about what they are doing relative to culture. One of the first pieces that we recommend an organization does is to define what is your culture and really get to what are those differentiating factors. So many organizations say, well, what makes, part of our culture is concern for others. And we see that in both the nonprofit world and the for-profit world, or that there's a lot of drive. And so we encourage organizations to start to get into other aspects of what makes your organization unique. What is that culture? How about the values? Is there an orientation of toward outcomes, or is there an orientation towards people? Or is it a team's orientation, or an orientation toward innovation, or an orientation toward stability? So to start to really think through what are our values and how do we then translate those values into our behaviors? What do we see in terms of maybe a degree of hierarchy? Is this an organization that's a pretty flat organization? That starts to drive into what the culture is like. How about the degree of urgency in the organization? Or is there a people orientation or a task orientation? So once you have started to put your arms around how do we define our culture here, and if it's aspirational, to really start to think through, as we are working with employees, how can we help bridge that gap between the current reality and our aspirational reality, where we want the organization to be culturally. We're going to talk about 3 key areas in looking at then how you might impact culture in your organization. So we'll look at well-being, we'll look at upskilling, and then we'll look at engagement as a factor in culture. So Julie, if you'll move on to the next slide, let's start by digging in a little bit into employee well-being. And in employee well-being, one of the resources that we like a great deal, maybe one that's, if you're a reader and want a new book to read too, we've really enjoyed, it's a little older book, it's Peak by Chip Conley. It's just about 5 to 10 years old, but really gets into motivation. So it takes Maslow's hierarchy of needs and then applies that to in the organization. How do we live then helping employees really find that peak part of the hierarchy in terms of self-actualization? But a piece of it really, of course, starts, as we know, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in terms of safety. And so what do we do relative to physical and mental safety, the psychological safety in an organization. So starting off by saying, let's make sure that we have those facets in place. And clearly during the past year, we've had to pay much more attention to in terms of what do we do relative to safety and helping employees feel that they have a safe environment. And that really has brought up so many aspects of culture and helped organizations recognize there are resources perhaps that are underutilized or undercommunicated to employees. What comes to mind immediately is under mental health and wellness employee assistance programs. So that's what EAP stands for. You see that in the fourth bullet there. Many of your health plans offer an EAP program. And what we find when we talk with employees and with employers is that many times that's a benefit that employees don't realize is available to them, and that the mental health supports that an EAP program provides are just a tip of the iceberg too, in terms of how an EAP can help employees balance both their personal and professional needs. So once that's in place too, we start to look at other ways too that employees experience culture. And a lot of that comes into sort of those positive everyday work experiences. Do employees feel connected? Do they feel connected to their work? Do they feel connected to their peers? Can we help from a work perspective, help them connect to the purpose of the organization? And nonprofits generally do that so well in helping employees see, here's the mission of the organization, how your work really makes a positive impact toward the mission of the organization. How about in terms of recognition, especially recognition of how employees have connected to the mission and are serving? And accomplishment. Employees come to work generally wanting to know, what is it that I should be doing? Why is what I'm doing important? And how do I know that what I'm doing, I'm on the right path in terms of what I'm doing? And so helping employees connect with the accomplishment is critical too, in terms of that overall well-being that employees experience at work. Relative to the social wellness too, we have seen employers find interesting in different ways over the last year to help employees really connect with one another, especially when working remotely. So one of the ideas that we saw that we liked a great deal was an organization that offered employees gift cards to have a coffee chat with one another. So they'd encouraged employees who did not know one another to get together for coffee, whether that was a virtual coffee break where they both got coffee, or whether it was meeting at an external cafe, for example, where they could sit outside and have a cup of coffee together. The organization wanted to connect employees who did not know one another, so that employees who were newer to the organization felt very connected to the whole organization. And so it offered employees $5 gift cards to be able to get together and get to know other employees. Another way that we saw organizations get employees together too was taking the idea of a scavenger hunt and sort of even the breakout room concept, and to put that in place in a virtual way of connecting. So helping employees again do something that promoted teamwork, but didn't necessarily require that they were together in person, so that they made those connections, those work connections. Along those lines, one of the other ways that we saw organizations invest in employee well-being that we thought was interesting too was relative to different types of physical wellness. There's an organization that offers to employees desk yoga. So whether those employees are in the office or they are working remotely, they found a yoga instructor who could walk employees through doing yoga at their desk so that employees were taking a break throughout the day. And thinking of taking a break too. When it comes to mental health and wellness, we have seen employees, an increase of organizations suggesting to employees too that they might even consider some apps like Headspace, for example, or Calm or Insight Timer to help with mindfulness, which particularly these days is such a critical aspect of, or being able to unplug and start to recharge a little bit too. So again, just some ways that we wanted to touch on in terms of pointing out ways that organizations have helped employees through investing in their well-being, and then really continue to emphasize that culture of being caring for the individual, and really letting employees know that they are a critical part of the organization and their success. Relative to physical wellness, one last idea I wanted to touch on with you today too was an organization that trained their frontline supervisors to start to, in their one-on-ones on a regular basis, so these are weekly one-on-ones, ask questions about the employees' lives and to start to be sensitive to changes in demeanor. It was an organization that found that from a psychological perspective, employees were saying they were really struggling. And so they started to have frontline leaders tap into understanding where employees were and then connecting employees to resources such as the EAP program as they started to, if they started to see any indications that maybe the employee was struggling. So we want to skip now onto talking about employee upskilling, another critical area in terms of culture. So Julie, if we can move on to the next slide and talk about upskilling a little here too. And it's essential that an organization continue to think through formalized methods of continued development. That part of an organization's culture, if it is a culture of recognizing and valuing employee development and employee tenure, then think through how do we help employees continue to develop their skills. And in particular, as we move into different ways that technology is impacting all of our organizations and industries, really thinking through to how do we help employees build those skills so they feel ready for what's on the horizon in your organization or in your industry. So in looking at how employees and employers can invest in employee upskilling, we find too that having a path that employees see that they are on helps them with a feeling that the work they are doing has meaning, not just for the organization too, but within their career, that there is meaning to the tasks that they're taking on, and that they can see that additional tasks are leading to a different path for them. So really working with employees to help them understand what the organization sees as the career path, and then doing what we call job crafting, which is allowing employees too to start to weigh in on where they would like to grow in terms of their career and even by growth in place in their role. So with job crafting, taking a look at, are there other tasks that would be meaningful for me that I'd like to take on, and working with my manager to take on those particular tasks. So again, some of it's relative to an upward path, but also some of it's just growth in place and then really having meaning laterally in our jobs. As you're looking to at performance and also skill development, we have seen more organizations have put in place mentoring programs that allow more tenured employees or employees who have certain skills to help others in developing those same skills or understanding of the organization. So more formal mentoring programs connecting employees and providing training to both the mentor and to the employee being mentored in terms of what that relationship might look like, and helping them develop then a plan for what that mentoring relationship will be. We are also finding too that organizations that have a culture of constructive feedback are really then finding a lot of bang for their buck in terms of performance management, that organizations that are intentional about finding a way to celebrate successes and on looking forward in terms of how an employee might do their job more effectively in the future on an ongoing basis. Those that have shifted from a performance management perspective of an entire focus on the past or a focus on what's not working, but instead, again, made that shift toward what is working. How do you get more? How do we help you do more of what is working well, and doing that on an ongoing basis? That shift toward a performance management culture of helping employees understand what good performance looks like, and helping them see the value of that performance to themselves and to the organization. Those organizations are perceived by their employees of having a culture that is a developmentally oriented culture and a positive culture in which employees see opportunities for development, and those that they want to stay in that organization for, where they're willing to not be lured away to another organization because they see the opportunity within their own organization, not just in the current, but in the future as well. And again, we encourage organizations to involve employees in employee upskilling, figuring out what is it that growth in place might look like for that employee, where are the places the employee wants to go, whether it's along a career path or in terms of building new and different skills. Perhaps it's even helping them prepare for a career that they'd like to have outside the organization, where the organization finds value in this period of time in which they are helping that employee develop, and that the employee finds that value as well. So in working through with employees this aspect of employee upskilling. Let's move on to talking a little bit about then investing in employee engagement. And when we are talking about employee engagement, here again, purpose is so critical. And purpose is, again, that piece of helping employees understand, why is it important that I'm doing the things that I'm doing? And how do I know that I'm successful in what I'm doing? So leadership practices that help an employee continue to understand how their work connects with the work of the whole organization, and how an employee's individual success really leads to the organization's success, which in many of our organizations and nonprofits relates to that client success that we're trying to achieve. Organizations that do a good job in terms of recognizing the good things happening, that appreciation, are organizations that employees say from a cultural perspective are a very positive, a very affirming kind of organization. And those organizations that employees find that they'd like to stay, and they indicate they'd like to stay with those organizations longer term, that to them, as they look out, they are more likely to say the grass is not greener elsewhere, that those are organizations in which they feel they have the opportunity within the organization and in which they want to stay. In terms of finding ways to help employees then have that sense of appreciation, we have seen organizations do things on an annual basis, for example, that replicate what we might have done previously in terms of maybe a holiday party. We have a client that got employees together because food and drink was a kind of a part of their culture as well. They had a virtual wine tasting. Another organization had a virtual silent auction, and the items that were auctioned off were items that employees had provided to the organization. So crafts that they had created. So one person, for example, had in their spare time done a quilt, and that was an item that was available for auction. So it was a way for the organization, because kind of an artistic aspect of was it part of the organization's culture, and having employees tap into their artistic selves as a part of the organization. The organization asked employees, hey, donate items to this, or provide items for the silent auction. And then they had the silent auction available so employees could not only appreciate one another's skills in a different way from what they saw normally at work, but then had a fun way of engaging with that, and through that silent auction, a way of connecting, even though they were remote. And then it provided for the organization. They made a donation from the proceeds there, as well as being able to support sort of the budding artists within the organization there. So again, finding unique ways to say, what is it that is important in our organization and how we're going to emphasize that here, and to share that with employees so that there is a positive sense of what we do as an organization. Let's take just a minute now and talk about too the role of the manager in doing that, because and we'll move forward, Julie, to the next slide. When we talk with employees about their perception of the organization, so much of that is tied to managers. And as I'm sure most of you have seen, Gallup said years ago, employees don't leave organizations, they leave managers. Well, the converse is true too, that often employees stay at an organization because of that manager relationship, that connection they have to their manager. And in particular, if they believe my manager has a vested interest in me and my career and caring for me, and they show that to me through providing me opportunities for training, development, upskilling. My manager recognizes me, provides appreciation. In particular, there is a balance, a 5-to-1 balance of I may have constructive feedback, but I have a lot of positive feedback. So for every bit of constructive feedback, there's even more positive feedback that helps me know I'm appreciated. And there's a lot of communication and feedback. My manager helps me connect to decisions that are being made in the organization, provide some transparency there relative to how the organization is moving forward and why, provides me an opportunity to provide my input and values that input, really listens and works to understand how we might implement the actions based on that feedback. So I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we've seen organizations do and that we recommend a great deal is having ongoing one-on-ones with employees. So whether that is a brief daily one-on-one or working with employees, having one-on-ones on a weekly basis, and having a portion of that one-on-one be a check-in on with the employee on just how are they doing personally. So a piece of that one-on-one can always be about work-related aspects of how are things going for you at work? What are the barriers that you're facing? How can I help you through that? What additional training do you need? But also looking at how are you doing? How are you doing outside of work? How are you doing with the challenges that are coming up with this environment that we're in now? So really having that personalized relationship with an employee, seeking to understand the employee and helping the employee feel understood and cared for. Recognizing that through all of these aspects of upskilling and recognition and communication, that accountability, when we talk about performance management and accountability, it doesn't have to include fear. It really can be, through this role of the manager, a very positive relationship and experience for employees. One of the other things that we have seen organizations do, and we think it's a tool that may work for your organization as well too, is to utilize pulse surveys as a way to have communication and feedback with employees. Those pulse surveys can either be done through a tool that you purchase or can be done for free. So taking a Survey Monkey and having a one question, that single question that goes out to employees and seeks their feedback on some regular basis, whether that's on a weekly basis, whether that's on a semi-weekly basis, on a daily basis. It continues to get feedback, solicit feedback from employees, continue to keep front of mind for them that your input matters to the organization, and then starting to get a pulse on how are things going in the organization and get a sense of that even before things get off track. So an organization can, if they need to, proactively start to address this is what's coming up with employees. And we need to get ahead of it and be able to address what's taking place. So if your organization is an organization that values feedback and acts on feedback, we're seeing pulse surveys too as a tool that many organizations are finding value in. Let's move on then to talking about some other steps that you might take. And that is, the first is considering a culture audit. So assessing your culture, again, identifying what are its strengths, what are the challenges there, what are the opportunities for improvement, how do employees feel, what's the employee experience like, and then really pinpointing what's the opportunity there and developing a strategy around how, if we feel that we're in a spot relative to our culture that we want to make changes, we don't just have to accept the culture that we have as an organization. We can put forth a concerted effort to make a difference in terms of our culture, in terms of how employees experience our culture, how external stakeholders experience our culture, and to create an environment that really then allows employees to very fully experience the organization in a positive way and want to stay at the organization on a longer term basis. We recommend there too that as you develop your strategies, that you define then how are we going to know if this is working? How do we have indicators that we're on the right path? Or if we're not on the right path, that we can start to then revector a little bit and move off that particular path. What measures are going to tell us that we're making some headway there? And then being consistent and proactive in terms of what we are doing in our actions that then are getting us toward the culture that we want to have. Success measures might be, for example, your organization may say absenteeism is a problem, or maybe there are the client complaints are a problem and we want to have fewer complaints, or maybe fewer employee complaints, or higher client retention, or higher employee retention, or perhaps it's higher time toward on completion of tasks. So again, thinking through what are the things in the organization, once we've defined what our culture is, if there are gaps, how are we going to figure out that we're headed in the right direction? Establish then those measures, those baselines, start to see how things are moving in the right direction, celebrate that movement in the right direction, and get champions within the organization, engage employees in being a part of making a difference in both their own work and in terms of what the culture is like in the organization. And recognizing that as you go along the path, you will gain insights. Make sure to take the time to examine the information that you're getting and make some decisions about whether you need to continue the things that you're doing or make some changes there. Let's move on to then the next slide, Julie, too, and just talk really quickly about some final takeaways too. And that is that, again, as we talked about early on, the work environment is changing. And so we are finding that there are so many changes that we've experienced over the last year and a half. Some of it's relative to COVID, some of it's relative to job movement, some of it's relative to how we are doing the work. So just so many different changes in the organizations that does provide for us a unique opportunity then to have it be a catalyst, to have a opportunity for us to make some positive changes and to really work on having the work environment, the culture that we want to have, that really then can have a positive impact on the well-being for employees, both the psychological well-being and the physical well-being, financial well-being for employees, the career development for employees. So to think through what are the ways that we can boost employee wellness, make sure that we are as an organization doing the things that we'd like to do so that we have a stronger culture, a stronger organization, and we're in a good spot to be able to adapt for what's next, which again, there's a little ambiguity. We're not entirely sure what's next, but to continue to adapt. So Julie, I'll take a break here too to see if there are any questions that I can answer, anything that comes in the chat.
I will keep an eye on the chat. I guess maybe I would be curious to hear a little bit, and going back to point number one and well-being and really going down to the social aspect. I thought you gave a
Mhm.
fabulous example, especially the holiday party and the silent auction. Those were amazingly creative. And, I know that the more people, if anyone out here maybe might be able to give some examples. I am just thinking as far as so many organizations have gone remote, we've gone
Mm,
remote,
mhm, mhm.
and our connection point used to be either a monthly or sometimes quarterly if we're really busy, and we'd all come together for lunch. And that was the only time I'd see people from other departments. And to help facilitate the social aspect, we are now dedicating, I don't know, 5, maybe 10 minutes on that Monday morning meeting, just to go around and share. And, usually it's what's going on the weekend. We've heard other organizations that are starting their meetings with tell me something good. And oftentimes it goes into the personal life. Um, but it helps. It does help, but really missing that connection, and just kind of curious, if you have ideas that you've seen that worked in other organizations, or maybe if someone wants to put in chat or come off mute or something. How are you keeping that interconnectedness, especially if some people are off site, you don't cross paths that often.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to hear what other organizations are doing as well too. So again, I'll echo what you're saying, Julie, which is we'd love to see either in the chat or have anybody unmute and share that with us as well. Some things that we're seeing too. I mean, just as you've said, Julie, the taking meeting times that may have previously been all business. We have these things we need to accomplish today. When we had those meetings, when we were in an environment in which we were all in person, that moment for connection, because so much of that we might be able to do outside of those meetings, those opportunities diminished. So we have seen more organizations say, we're going to make sure that we are spending at the very beginning of every meeting time for a check-in of some sort. Sometimes it's even maybe a celebration of a milestone. Who has birthdays this month, for example. We know an organization that has monthly meetings. And so their check-in includes what are the birthdays this month, and they have sent out to those employees a birthday treat that they're showing everybody else, here's my treat, and everybody's celebrating that with them. Um, we've seen other employees too that create sort of social networks, and especially again if they're working remotely, where they've said, "Hey, here's a group that this is people who have pets who love, want to show off the pictures of their pets, talk about their pets, and talk about the challenges they're facing." So, kind of a little twist on affinity groups. The idea of affinity groups, certainly too, of having employees who may be experiencing the organization or challenges externally in different ways too, of really helping them find connection outside their immediate family, but even, kind of within their work families too, of having those connections. We're seeing that as such an important way that people are connecting, and then that employers are making space for employees to do that. Starting to think through too, what are some of those connections that we might have had if you and I were in the office together and passed one another in the hallway? What might those conversations have looked like? And so, what are some ways that we can encourage that connection? And so, one organization has a virtual lunchroom, if you will. So employees can drop in at any time, and whoever is there is available to connect with that person and chat with that person, whether it's somebody they've already known. So in some cases, we've seen employees saying like, "Okay, listen, I'll meet you at noon in the in the lunchroom and other times just, hey, here's somebody new that I haven't met before who's dropped into this room. Just taking a minute to chat and get to know them and what they're working on. Again, sort of creating what might have taken place if we were in the same office. And we're seeing a chat that's saying you're loving that. So that's great. Love to share the good ideas. I mean, it just, I think all of us are challenged by um, the same things and you know, the more we can share with each other, here's some things that are working. In particular, I think for so many organizations, we have employees that if we are still remote are struggling with a little bit of that sense of connection. And so whatever we can do to help one another out in terms of saying, how do we help employees stay connected? And, you know, it's great to share those ideas.
Those are
Um,
fabulous ideas, fabulous ideas. Yeah,
I can
continue on.
share.
I do have 3 questions in here, but go ahead and wrap up on this one.
Stephanie, it sounds like Stephanie had a
Okay.
question too.
Okay,
I don't have a
yes.
question. I'm taking your invitation to come off mute to just share a little something we do.
Oh, great.
So before the pandemic, only about a third of our staff worked in the same office. We have another third of our staff as traveling consultants, and then another third of our staff works remotely out of their homes from San Diego to New Hampshire, all across the country. So a couple of years ago, we started a thing called Pop Culture Lunch Hour. So once a month on a Friday, we get together and we just talk about stupid things
Oh, I love it.
like nothing heavy is allowed. So one of the things, like for instance, last month we talked about Met Gala outfits and what we loved and what we hated, and we reviewed. I make it sound more formal than it was, but like somebody pulled up the Vogue article that showed every single outfit, and we were like, yay, nay, whatever. So like in another time we talked about Britney Spears, like we watched the documentary about Britney Spears several months ago. So that has really been fun. People that you would not expect to pop in, and some people who don't have anything really to contribute, but just want to be connected to us, pop in and just listen and laugh. So I mean, we've also got a lot of millennials on our staff. So I think that partly drives some of this, but even old people like me show up and it's just super fun. So that's been a really great addition to kind of our culture.
Oh, love that idea. Yeah, because I think too, it's the, you know, sometimes it's the silly stuff that we do outside of work. And let's face it, like, you know, going through and looking at all the outfits that were on the red carpet at the Met Gala, you know, fun, but not necessarily serious, right? Not necessarily. That's what I mean by the silly is, you know, what's that impact there? So thanks for sharing that. That is great. Julie, you said you had a couple questions that came in too. Should we?
We do. So, how do you balance the need to treat everyone as individuals, their strengths and needs, and yet also provide a fair system of accountability?
Yeah, great question too, right? Because you know, there is an aspect of, you know, we need to make sure that we're treating everyone the same way, and then we're treating everyone as individuals, and what's that balance look like? And the reality is, you know, in each of our roles, we have different expectations in those roles. And so it is fair for us, it really is equitable to say in this role, this is the set of expectations, and to work with that employee on those expectations. But to start to question whether those expectations are what that impact is on the performance of the organization. So, for example, we have seen organizations in many cases start to question, does somebody need to be at their desk at 8 a.m., for example? Can we have some flexibility even in terms of getting to what's that start time look like? Now, I know many nonprofits were already working towards saying, hey, we have maybe a little more flexibility in terms of how employees are starting to approach the work. But if your organization is one that had not started to question what are the ways in which we can craft this job so that it really then helps employees start to say, here's how for me individually, I can get to meeting what the needs are in that role, we then start to really accomplish the two things that we're after, which are, we do have work that needs to be done, things that the organization is trying to achieve. Those are critical. And how we get there and recognizing that individuals who are doing that work, really that we honor those individuals and allow them to start to craft how they get to those expectations, that we aren't creating false constraints on how to do that. We then really get to a point of being able to achieve what your question is after, which is, how do we do both? How do we then hold firm to organizational needs and honor employees and who they are and the unique ways that they provide value to the organization?
Good. Well, I'm going to switch gears here on you on a different type of question. Do you have comments or guidance on generational differences and creating a positive culture?
Sure. I think one of the first things to recognize too is sometimes there is what might be attributed to differences in generations that sometimes too is really just about that season of life that someone is in. So, for many of us, what we were looking for from work when we were in our early 20s, for example, might be a little different from what we were looking for in work when we are in our early 50s, for example. So to recognize that some of that may not be wholly generationally oriented, but it may even be sort of that season of life, and recognizing, maybe seeing a little bit of ourselves and how someone else is approaching things, or recognizing they may approach things differently. And then starting to recognize there is a difference too, generationally, in terms of expectations. And we see now too, with newer entrants to the workforce, they are more and more asking organizations for opportunities to work remotely, for example, or have a hybrid approach to work. And that certainly wasn't an option, let's say 35 years ago. That really we didn't have the technology in place to do that. So those expectations may be a little different. So what we recommend to organizations is getting back to understanding the individual, is to hear out what the individual is asking for, and really understanding then what is it that's driving what they're asking for. Is there a way to meet in the middle too? It doesn't mean that an organization, if the need is there for someone to be in person, for example, for a period of time, that the organization, it's not an either or. Maybe the organization says, sure, you want to be 100% remote, we want you 100% in the office, but maybe we can meet in the middle. Maybe there's a way that we can find some flexibility within there. So recognizing, again, some of what an employee may be interested in may be generationally related, it may be seasonally, season of life related, it may be just that individual. This is what that individual desires or needs. It may be driven by some of the things that are taking place in that individual's life outside of work. But again, some of that may be just based too on what they have experienced in their working life, including perhaps how technology is used even in school, for example, and that starts to shape expectations that employees want to bring into then how they are going about doing work, and that really understanding what it is and accommodating, if possible, finding a way to provide that may be good for employees across the entire spectrum of generations in the workplace.
Yeah. We got a comment here and it said, thanks for making that distinction between generational differences and season of life. That, wow, that kind of the light bulb went off and go, yeah, that's so true. It really did change. So we have one more question in here. If you have any other questions, go ahead and send it, but we'll probably be wrapping up soon. And I think it's more of a comment, but I think that you can maybe shine some light or give us some directions that someone did mention. Some people aren't looking for community, that here we're talking a lot about virtual and whatnot. And I do remember when I was managing on site that I would think as them as, oh, wow, these are, these employees don't take as much time and you're so much easier, you're a little bit more introverted and whatnot. But as a manager, is this something we need to be aware of? If they're quiet, they're shy, maybe they're not showing much interest in being involved in a community as far as connection and making them feel comfortable?
Sure, sure. There's some degree of connection where we may say that connection is needed for work. It may be needed for, let's say, innovation as part of your culture and creativity. And maybe some of that connection really does help start to drive more of that, where we may say, let's start to create then connection that helps drive some of the things that are valuable, are kind of needed for the organization. And help employees start to navigate to what's available to them. What are and those expectations that gets to that culture in terms of what that communication and connection looks like. But to recognize that people's needs are different. So we may offer, for example, a virtual happy hour, and we may find that there are some employees that holds limited appeal for them, and that's okay, that is available for the employees who need that connection. Or there may be employees who need that connection, but that's not the venue that they're going to find that connection in. Maybe there's something about a happy hour, for example, that just to them doesn't fit, but we can find some other ways in which employees are connecting. So I think, again, Julie, what you're saying, it's about sort of honoring how employees come to doing their work, recognizing that some employees have an incredible need for connection and other employees have minimal need for connection, and there are employees all the way in the middle there. And then thinking through, how do we create those opportunities, and what are those situations in which we might say to this, we do need, and so here's how we're going to get there. So maybe it is even, we need some additional connections. We're going to provide that at the beginning of meetings that are more required meetings, so that we're encouraging that thing that we need. And then we have more optional ways for people to connect available to those who want that connection.
With management, I'm always thinking it back as far as parenting, that each child has a different personality and you parent in such a different way. And I kind of feel like as a manager that it kind of settles down a lot like that also. So.
Well, sure. I think for each of us, we know within the context of, for example, a family that we might have grown up in, that there are differences. But we don't always start to recognize that, oh, sure, if I approach things differently, others do as well. And I think that again, that's many times our first frame of reference, right, is, kind of a home life. And then, we realize it helps us understand, well, let's apply some of those same concepts to our life and work as well. We spend so much time there. So valuing, there are different ways of getting to the same outcome. How do we do that and honor each person?
Right. This has been wonderful, Deirdre. And if you have enjoyed this, if you could please send a thank you in chat and just let her know how much you have enjoyed this. I want to say this has been great. Thank you for coming out. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Always so nice to partner with charitable advisors. Thank you so much. It was great hearing from everyone here too, and look forward to more idea sharing too outside of this as well. Thanks so much, everyone.
Everyone have a fabulous day.
Bye now.
Stop recording.